The funeral service for former Vice President Richard B. Cheney at the Washington National Cathedral served as a powerful, albeit complex, symbolic event. While honoring one of the most influential and polarizing figures in modern American political history, the gathering became a striking illustration of the country's deep political realignment. The service featured eulogies from his two-term principal, former President George W. Bush, and his daughter, former Congresswoman Liz Cheney. Notably, the pews were filled with a rare constellation of bipartisan heavyweights, including former President Joe Biden, alongside 4 living former vice presidents, Supreme Court justices, and congressional leaders. This unity on sacred ground contrasted sharply with one prominent absence that defined the event's political undertones. The guest list offered a clear visual narrative of America's fractured political center. The presence of George W. Bush and Joe Biden. Bush's presence was expected, cementing the professional and personal bond of his two-term presidency. His tribute, focusing on Cheney's integrity, high intelligence, and seriousness of purpose, underscored the reverence the traditional Republican establishment holds for his decades of service. More significant, however, was the attendance of President Joe Biden. Biden's participation, despite his deep policy disagreements with Cheney, symbolized a commitment to traditional American decorum and institutional respect, highlighting the shared belief that family is the beginning, middle, and end, as Biden stated. This bipartisan reverence for institutional roles over political rivalry suggested a longing among the old guard for a return to civility. The absence of Donald Trump. The most telling political statement was the absence of President Donald Trump, who was not invited. Cheney, in the final years of his life, had become one of Trump's most strident critics, even endorsing the opposing party's candidate. Trump's refusal to issue a public statement upon Cheney's death, contrasting with the lowering of flags as required by statute, punctuated the irreversible schism between the traditional, interventionist, Bush-era conservatism that Cheney embodied and the current populist America First movement led by Trump. The consequence is clear. The Republican Party, as represented at this funeral, is currently 2 distinct parties, one of institutions and one of populist insurgency. This event serves less as a eulogy for Cheney and more as a barometer for the state of American politics, suggesting several key predictions. Institutionalism versus populism. The funeral crystallized the ongoing war for the soul of the Republican Party. The traditional conservatives, the Bush Republicans, and their allies, including the anti-Trump movement, are firmly aligned with institutional norms, represented by the National Cathedral setting, military honors, and attendance by Supreme Court and congressional leadership. The continued animosity between the Cheney and Trump factions ensures that this ideological civil war will persist, potentially for another decade, influencing primaries and congressional leadership. The longing for decorum, Biden's presence, along with other former officials, suggests a strong, albeit quiet, hunger among political veterans for a return to pre-2016 political decorum. These acts of mutual respect serve as a nonverbal argument against the divisive rhetoric that has characterized recent cycles. However, while symbolic, these gestures do not currently translate into legislative cooperation or political realignment, as the underlying ideological and cultural fissures remain too deep. The prediction is that while moments of bipartisan courtesy will occur, they will remain isolated events rather than harbingers of systemic political harmony. While it is impossible to offer a political solution for a national funeral, the event did offer a symbolic pathway toward bridging some divides. The presence of adversaries like Biden and the moderate wing of the GOP at an event dedicated to a deeply conservative figure demonstrates that respect for service and shared humanity can still supersede policy conflict. The most valuable takeaway is that institutions, not individuals, are the bedrock of civility. If future leaders choose to prioritize institutional respect over personal grudges, engaging in such acts of grace, they might slowly begin to re-establish the common ground required for functional governance, even in moments of profound disagreement.